We're going to the western islands now, the islands directly over the hotspot. On these islands, the lava has been flowing fairly recently, and as a result, any terrestrial-based animals that washed up on these shores would find life tough going. The largest island is here in the west. Its name is Isabela, or Albemarle. It's over 4,500 square kilometers and constitutes over half of all the land area of the Galapagos Islands. Isabela is composed of 5 volcanoes, and of course the ground is mostly lava. The result is that terrestrial animals generally have a hard time making a living in these western islands. One final note about the volcanoes. These volcanoes do not tend to explode the way you expect volcanoes to do. Instead, they tend to ooze lava. These volcanoes are not the tall stratovolcanoes, but rather these kind of volcanoes are called shield volcanoes. They tend to release their lava much more slowly over a longer period of time and do considerably less damage as a result. Shield volcanoes are called that because they tend to produce mounds which look like a shield setting on the ground, as opposed to a steeper mountain. But with that said, how does life take hold on the Galapagos? What do they eat? How do they make a living? Most animals don't depend entirely on the land. There are 5 currents that come into the Galapagos. Probably the most important current is the Humboldt Current. It comes out of the south, and the Cromwell Current coming out of the west. Those are both cold water currents. Cold water holds more oxygen and therefore more life, and the result is good feeding for those animals that depend on those currents. Cold water currents predominate during half of the year, and the other half of the year the warm water currents like the Panama Current predominate. We arrived as the currents are shifting from the warm water to the cold water currents.
Bathymetric studies, examining the depths of the ocean using sonar tracks, give the archipelago a whole new dimension. Galapagos is a chain of submarine volcanoes that have coalesced into a vast underwater platform. This monumental plinth drastically changes the routing of the currents that sweep its flanks. It forces the cool Cromwell Current, heading in from the west, to surge up from the ocean floor.
Now it's easy to see how the fishes got here. They just followed the food in the currents, and they ended up in the Galapagos at the end of the Humboldt Current and some of the others. These little fishes happen to have found a friendly place in the shadow of the Marianne, and they seem to be enjoying themselves. But any time that there are little fishes around, there are big fishes not far behind them. All of a sudden, the little fish disappeared, and I looked to see where the big fish was and what it was. And on the other side of the ship, I saw a ray. Actually, several of them. Rays are related to sharks, but they tend to be thin as pancakes and have wings so that they fly through the water more than anything else. Here we see a constellation of 15 golden rays. One of the most impressive marine encounters in the Galapagos is with the Pacific manta ray, the largest of the rays. Specimens of this fish have reached wingspans of more than 20 feet, and with their flattened body shape, they glide along like underwater birds. Manta rays, sometimes called devil rays or devilfish, are filter feeders, gulping down large amounts of water into their mouths with the help of special appendices in both sides of their heads. These extensions give them their alternate name, the devil ray. Once they have a mouthful of water and plankton, they spit the water back out and eat the plankton. One interesting feature of mantas is their color pattern. Mantas are most commonly black above and white below, but some are blue on their backs, Individual mantis possess distinct dorsal and ventral coloration that is unique to each animal. It's believed that the markings on their shoulders and ventral side show distinctive regional differences. The size and shape of the shoulder patches, the precise form of spots and blotches on the ventral side, and the lifetime pattern of scars form a pattern of markings as unique as a human fingerprint. This next little fish is a puffer fish. It blows itself up to expand its size when it's threatened, and it's good eating if you're Japanese and you know how to prepare them, of course, because they are poisonous, and if you make an error in the preparation, it could be a fatal error. Of course, the fish aren't the only thing that just came in with the current. There are a series of crabs that also came in. The first one that you're going to see is the Sally Lightfoot crab. It's a very pretty crab, and you can see that it would have no trouble making a living on a volcanic island. Because it lives between the land and the sea, that means that it can pick up food that's either washed ashore or algae that starts growing on the lava rocks. No problem here for them. The Sally Lightfoot crab is omnivorous, and like its name suggests, it is light-footed. It's very agile and can get around quite well. They're very common in the Galapagos and throughout most of the Americas and even in Africa. These next crabs are ghost crabs. They're very rapid, and those little stalks at the top of their head, those are their eye stalks. They're very difficult to catch, and when they feel threatened, they go down a hole. Finally, we have the hermit crab. The hermit crab is a soft-shelled crab, and it's very vulnerable. And so it looks for someone else's shell, which has been discarded, and it adopts that shell and carries it around with it, thus carrying its protection right on its own back. As the crab grows, it needs to look for larger and larger shells to crawl into. Now here's something you don't expect to see on the equator. It's a penguin. And the penguins are related to the penguins that you find in Antarctica. They followed the Humboldt Current north along the South American coast until they got to the Galapagos, which is where the Humboldt Current ends. They make a living here, but I can't imagine that they're terribly happy. As you can see, they don't quite so much swim through the water as they fly through the water. And this is something I really didn't expect. It's a penguin floating on the surface of the water as if he were a duck or something. I have never seen this kind of behavior before. Of course, there are lots of other birds that made it to these islands. They flew there, of course, and one of the most common types are diving birds of one type or another, such as pelicans. And when they go into action, you can see how they make their living without any difficulty. They swoop down into the water, go into the water, and scoop up a certain amount of fish. Now, this is a fine diving bird that flew into the Galapagos to get the fish, but now, today, he can't fly out. This is a flightless cormorant, and as you can see, his wings are very small. They're about the third the size that he needs in order to fly, and his body is very big. And part of the reason for that is because his legs have become very strong so that they can paddle him along in the water. Since there were no predators on the islands, the cormorant didn't need to be able to fly. And now it can. Every day we have to weigh anchor and take off to a new location and see new sights. And we're traveling up along the western coast of Isabela, or Albemarle, and we're headed down the other side. One thing to keep in mind is that all of these islands are volcanic. I know I've mentioned that before, but one of the things that it means is that there are likely to be lava tubes almost everywhere throughout any of the islands. Now, this particular lava tube that we're going down into is actually on the island of Santa Cruz, which in the English language would be indefatigable. However, this particular lava tube is extremely large, and it's been opened up for tourists. And the result is it's got incandescent lighting on the inside of it. But as you can see, it's an extremely large tube. Nevertheless, tubes similar to this, sometimes quite close to the surface, can be found on virtually any of the islands. And if you're not careful about where you're walking, it's possible that you could step onto a thin spot in the crust of the lava and crash through into one of these lava tubes underneath. Now, these tunnels often extend all the way out into the ocean, and that means that ocean water is going to fill them up and be brought into the center of the island pretty often. And sometimes that water is actually visible on the surface in the form of little pools or lagoons. And that's one of the things that frustrated Bishop Thomas de Berlinga. When they found water, often it was brackish water, not the sort of water that they wanted to drink, not the sort of water that they needed. But there is another creature that needs this sort of water, and that's the flamingo. And it happens that, in fact, the Galapagos does have a colony of flamingos. Now, these flamingos are genetically related to the ones in the Caribbean area, and as a matter of fact, there's only a handful of them, but they could fly out if the situation ever demanded it, unlike the flightless cormorant. There is another creature that finds these lava tubes and crevices in the rock to be extremely useful, and that is the fur seal. First of all, the fur seal is actually a sea lion rather than a seal, and the way you can tell the difference is because sea lions use their shoulders and arms more, and seals use their tails to swim by. During the day, the fur seals tend to hide out in the old lava tubes. Frequently, these lava tubes are connected to the ocean, and there is ocean salt water in them, and that salt water fluctuates according to the waves and the tides. Like the penguin, the fur seals came up from the Antarctic. They followed the Humboldt Current along South America and ended up at the Galapagos. There's plenty of food here for them. The cold currents take care of that. But during the day, they suffer. The equator is simply no place for an animal with a double-layered fur coat. But in addition, that double-layered fur coat made it very huntable, and they were hunted to what was thought to be extinction in the 1930s. But since the animals are nocturnal, not all of them were killed, and they're making a comeback. But fur seals, or if you prefer, fur sea lions, aren't the only pinniped in the Galapagos. The more common one is the California sea lion. And this California sea lion has got himself a fish. He's in a mangrove swamp, and he's trying to figure out how to beat that fish into small pieces so that he can swallow it down easily. California sea lions are known to be very playful, not only with themselves, but they also seem to enjoy the company of people. They play with divers quite often and snorkelers, and in the Galapagos at least they're reported to steal cameras, underwater cameras, and run off with them. Anything for a joke, you know. Sea lions are almost always part of the welcoming committee on the Galapagos Islands. Baby sea lions are left in nurseries while mom goes out for groceries, and no one has more fun than baby sea lions. You did notice the stick, didn't you? This is very dog-like behavior. I believe you could teach him to play fetch. And when baby wants mom, he cries very much like a human baby. Every day we have to set sail to maintain our schedule. By the way, the movie Master and Commander is based on some real events. The movie is based on the book by that name, but in the book it's not a French frigate, the Acheron, that they're chasing. Instead, it's the War of 1812, and it's an American ship, the Norfolk. Now, the Norfolk is fictitious. The real ship that was sailing in these waters during the War of 1812 was the Essex. And the Essex did substantial damage to the British whaling fleet in the Pacific. Herman Melville had written about the Essex. In fact, He had been a sailor aboard one of the whaling ships in these waters, and it's that experience that helped him to write the book Moby Dick.